Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sinjega TV with myself, Stephen Old.
And me, Rich Gibbons.
Hello, Rich. So today we're going to be asking a question, and this isn't just me pretending. I'm going to be really asking this question. What is multiplexing? I wonder if it's something I've heard of and forgotten, or like it sounds familiar, but what on earth is it?
Cool. Great question. And yeah, I'm sure you will have come across it in some form. So it's concepts. It applies in various parts of IT, networking, etc. But certainly with software licensing and particularly with Microsoft, it comes up quite regularly. So multiplexing, in essence, is the idea of trying to reduce the number of licenses that you need to do something. So it's the idea, a typical example, if you had 500 people that were accessing a SQL server, you would buy 500 client access licenses. What some people will try and do is have those 500 people access one machine and then move what they're doing from that one machine to the SQL server and then say, oh, I only need one license because I've only got one thing accessing the database or whatever it might be. And in a nutshell, whenever Microsoft or any of the software vendors are trying to prevent multiplexing, that's what they're trying to stop. This idea of you kind of artificially reducing the number of licenses that you need to buy. And in cases like that, it's quite clear cut. And really, regardless of your opinion of software vendors, you can agree if you should need 500, then you need 500. Reducing it down to one is unfair.
So while it's technically within the rules, it's against the spirit of what you're, of the contract in reality. Is that fair? Like, you could argue that it's not breaking the contract because it is one user, but in reality it's very much you trying to game the system and getting maybe unfair advantage.
So Microsoft, and I think most of the other publishers, have specific multiplexing clauses in all their agreements and contracts that say you can't do it. Multiplexing is against the rules of the agreement, the product use rights, whatever it might be. And this can lead to some relatively contentious discussions where the rules really are, it doesn't matter how many layers there are between the product and the user. So if you have a user who writes some data to a server that updates a business intelligence server that goes through a CRM server that writes that data to SQL, the rules would be that user who kicked that process off still needs to be licensed for SQL, even though there are several layers in between. So that there can be, from a design and architecture perspective, there can be some questions as to, well, is this all one process? And it tended to come up with SQL Server. That was the main scenario. But now, in our wonderful modern world, Power Platform has brought it back. So there are all kinds of situations with Dynamics 365 data. If you have data from Dynamics and it is moved to another system and people interact with it, those users need to be licensed in some way for a Microsoft product. And then depending on the usage, the data, etc., it might be they need a Dynamics license, maybe they need a Power Platform license. So that's a big multiplexing area. Power Automate as well, when you're building business workflows and processes, lots of work around, this process links to this process. Does every user need to be licensed, or is it just so? Unfortunately, it's a real kind of case by case basis. There are no real blanket rules, other than if it feels like multiplexing, it probably is.
Right.
And
so Does it happen because people are trying to game the system, or because there's maybe a lack of understanding at the design level by the people doing that, and because they're not licensing experts? Is it a bit of a mix? Because it sounds like it's in every contract, right? So if everyone knew the contract, then they probably wouldn't be doing it unless they were trying to game the system.
So yeah, it's a bit of both. There are some, relatively few, but there are some occasions where you look at it and you think, you've got 10,000 users and you're trying to buy 7 licenses. Someone must have gone, that doesn't seem right. But in most cases, it is down to technologies like SQL. It's typically down to the people that design the system not knowing the licensing rules and looking at it, quite matter of factly. I've got one thing accessing, I need one access license. So most of the time, and this is why it's quite a good example of why sort of shifting ITAM left earlier into the design process is really useful, because an ITAM person very quickly will spot a multiplexing scenario and be able to flag it. But these days, with Power Platform and Dynamics, a lot of it is down to the fact that it's new technology. The rules are not fully formed. So it's a lot like, the kind of the legal system where, you have a set of laws, but then over time, new ones are added, or you kind of solidify exactly what that rule means. And licensing is very similar, and that process hasn't happened yet for Power Platform. So there are lots of scenarios where you build something and it's like, well, it could be this or it could be that. There isn't really any precedent from Microsoft ruling on other customers. So it's a real kind of cutting edge frontier at the minute. But my advice is, consider multiplexing, and at least when you're designing these things, at least write down why you did it that way and why you think it's okay. And then in the future, if there is an audit or something, you can at least show that you considered it, because it's a big thing. Microsoft updated their multiplexing guide for the first time in like 3 or 4 years, about 6 months ago. So it's definitely on Microsoft's mind. And of course, I'm talking about Microsoft because that's my background, but multiplexing, it occurs with pretty much every vendor. The SAP indirect access scenario that we saw a few years ago, that was effectively multiplexing. This idea of connecting things and funneling, using one system through another, and that kind of thing. So it's it's quite a difficult issue to pin down, but if you get it wrong, it can be expensive to fix.
That's what I was going to ask, because I mean, it's been a while since I did much in terms of user licensing for SQL. But then when I also think about Power BI, like if it's big numbers, the per user cost is small, but relatively small. In Power BI, it's more, but it'll add up. And if you did put it in the design process, you'd quite quickly actually see, holy mackerel, this is going to cost more than the whole project, right? Sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sometimes it's a case of, right, let's look at, maybe we should do this on a per core basis, because then that user access license problem goes away. Or if you're in Power Platform, maybe we need to re-architect it. So yeah, with the current scenarios, it can quickly go from, we need this team to be licensed for Dynamics, to, actually, we need the entire company to be licensed because they're accessing this data. And as you say, that can dwarf the initial cost of the entire project. So it's not, some people look at it as quite a niche, pedantic licensing geek kind of issue, but in the world of ITAM, if there's an ITAM risk, it translates to business risk, and that risk is usually financial. So it definitely pays literally to get it right.
Brilliant. Well, I now know what multiplexing is. I think I've probably done it. I haven't come across the term. I definitely have kind of looked at how to reduce, like, well, not reduce. I would have just kind of gone, well, I've just got my web service connecting to my DB, so I need user access for my web service. That's kind of how I would do it. A lot of my stuff was web though, so probably a little bit more forgiving anyway, because of the way web's built. But yeah, I definitely have been guilty of it because I didn't know about it. I didn't realize I was being naughty, if that makes sense, which is exactly to your point. So thank you so much, Rich. Hopefully everyone learned a lot there. Almost a deep dive, but I think it's one of those that if we did deep dive, could be very, very, very treacherously deep. So thank you so much for explaining what that is, and thank you everyone for watching.